Being, thank you. We're going to record this meeting. We want these meetings to be able to be viewed by folks who are not able to join us at this meeting time. We want this information still to be accessible after the fact. Please keep yourself on mute until you're ready to speak and consider using the raise hand feature. It's a helpful way for us to be able to see when you have a question you want to ask without being too disruptive. Please be courteous and respectful. We've never really had an issue with this on the team, but it's always good to mention that. I'll quickly go through our agenda. We just did introductions. We're going to talk quickly about the Harbor and Estuary Program's State of the Estuary Report, which just came out. And it looks at sort of long-term trends and indicators of water quality health across the entire region, going up a ways up the Hudson River. And then we're going to look at the state of the Bronx River kind of as a response to the State of the Estuary Report to see how things are going on the Bronx River in 2023, things that are concerning to us, and then looking forward in 2024, the things that we're going to be focusing on next year. And there'll be a chance for you all to actually give some input on things that you're interested in seeing us do in 2024. We'll look over our program year in review. So the things that we did along the Bronx River with volunteers and community members, the celebrations that we had, and then we'll again look forward into 2024 to see what things you all would be interested in seeing and participating in next year. We're going to talk a little bit about watershed protections, policies that have been rolled back, and we're seeing a lot of things happening across the country with environmental protections sort of coming under attack. We'll have a little quick discussion about what that means for the Bronx River and what we can do about that. And then, of course, we always end these meetings with feedback and questions. We want this meeting to be as collaborative as possible. This is a team. This is not just me, although I do a lot of talking on these meetings, but this is a team. We always want as much collaboration and participation as possible to make sure that we are serving the needs of these communities and the river as much as we can. So with that, I'm going to skip our little icebreaker. Sorry. But we did do our introductions. And so the State of the Estuary Report. So the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program is a big authority in this region. It's one of three major sort of scientific policy agencies that look at the health of the New York Harbor. And so we're looking at things like wildlife, we're looking at things like the oxygen levels and all those things. And so they released a report that looked at 14 indicators of water quality and ecosystem health. Looking back as far as possible, I think the report, some of those indicator data goes back as far as 1950, I think. So these are really long-term studies that have been done. And the report kind of shows us where we are, sort of where those trends are, and what's getting better and what's getting worse, right? And so the area that it was looking at was covering portions of northern New Jersey, portions of New York City, and then the tidal portion of the Hudson River. And that's all lumped together into this report. So I'm not going to go through the entire report, but I do want to reflect on a couple of aspects that were interesting to me from the perspective of the Bronx River. We can make the full report available to you. It's not currently up on HEP's website. We do have the link, and so we can share that with you if you're interested in seeing the full report. But we'll just get started with some of the what I think are interesting results. The first one is a decline in diadromous fish. So diadromous fish are fish that live in both freshwater and saltwater. Typically, these are migratory fish. They might spend part of their life in one habitat, and then they migrate to another habitat to spawn, have their babies, and they may go back and forth, as is the case of fish like shad, which is being shown here. Other fish of concern are alewife and other river herring, striped bass, and those kinds of fish that spend their lives in the ocean but come up to rivers in order to spawn. What we're seeing is a long-term decline in these fish. There was a sort of brief increase in 2013 when fishing restrictions were applied in the Atlantic, But overall, we're seeing that these numbers are not doing well. Other fish in the estuary have actually disappeared entirely. Tom cod is one fish that is no longer being seen in the waters around New York City, although that fish was found at one point. It's no longer being seen. And so this is a concerning trend. Um, you know, anytime that we're seeing wildlife decreasing, it points to problems with our ecosystems that are impacting those species. So by itself, it's concern. In context with everything else, it paints a picture of what might be happening in the estuary. Um, Region-wide, we're also seeing, well, we're not really seeing any strong trends in established oyster beds. And so if you're not aware, there are major efforts across the New York City region to reintroduce the Atlantic oyster to our waters. This species was once found in abundance. Actually, New York City was considered the oyster capital of the world for a long, long time until overharvesting and pollution wiped out almost all of our oysters. Our response is actually that the oyster beds in the Bronx River are doing quite well. So the Billion Oyster Project has its largest man-made oyster reef, which is just off the coast of Soundview Park. And we, the Bronx River Alliance, along with a couple other partner organizations, spent 4 years visiting that reef and checking the signs of health, how well the oysters were establishing, how big they were growing, how much their offspring were actually attaching to rocks and nearby substrate and growing, right? So is the recruitment of younger oysters going well? And how much has the reef had an impact on the local ecosystem? So have smaller fish species and other, crabs and things moved into the oyster reef as a habitat? So we were seeing good signs that the oyster reef is actually thriving. It's now a kind of healthy community. And hopefully will continue to expand and grow across the mouth of the Bronx River. This seems to buck the trend of sort of more variable data that folks are seeing across other parts of the harbor and estuary. So it's good news for the Bronx River, and perhaps the things that are working well here can be used to increase the success of other oyster reefs across the city. So here's another sort of confusing or sort of not very well defined one. Dissolved oxygen obviously is a very important indicator. All aquatic wildlife needs dissolved oxygen to breathe, otherwise they will suffocate in the water. And we were seeing long-term increasing trends from 1950 up until the 90s. And that's around where things started to plateau. And from the 2000s onwards, we're not really seeing an increase or a decrease overall in dissolved oxygen. It's just kind of from one year to the next, very variable. And so that's interesting. It's good that we are now at a threshold that is, good for wildlife, but the oxygen level could definitely be better. And as the ocean and our waterways are getting hotter from climate change, that's a concern because hot water actually cannot hold as much oxygen as cold water. And so this is a plateau, and if our waters are getting warmer, there's a concern that perhaps this number actually could start to decrease in future years. We're not seeing very good oxygen levels during the summer on the Bronx River either. So that's definitely a concern for us. This is one that was definitely really interesting, caught my eye for sure. If any of you have ever participated in a trash cleanup along the Bronx River, you know that floatable garbage is a major concern for us. There are times when it looks like you could walk across the river because there's so much garbage that gets piled up sometimes. Apparently, across the entire region, floatable trash is decreasing. The efforts to clean up and report on the amount of garbage coming out of the waterways has remained the same, but the amount of debris being removed is going down. And so it's not because we're not doing it as much, we're still going out and cleaning, there's just less to clean up. There might be a similar trend happening on the Bronx River. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But this is definitely an interesting trend and one that we're going to keep an eye on for sure. Again, so here's the ocean temperatures and sort of waterway temperatures locally. Overall, this is an increasing trend, and so our waterways are getting warmer with climate change. Some of these waterways across the city are getting quite hot, actually. And once you pass a certain threshold, you are going to start to see your wildlife suffocating and dying. And so that's particularly a concern in places like Jamaica Bay, which has very sensitive ecosystems, in other parts of the city where there are major conservation efforts taking place. This trend is not, or this specific graph is not showing drastic increases in temperature on the Bronx River and Western Long Island Sound. But the water does get pretty toasty during the summer. And we do occasionally see fish dying during those hot months. We know that oxygen level does go down. So again, this is one that we're definitely, the office lights just turned off on me. That has not happened for a while. That's okay, I'll keep going. So we're gonna keep an eye on this trend for sure. And I'll see if I can get the lights to turn on in the office. So while I do that, any questions or comments on any of the data that I just reported on? All right, hearing none, I am going to keep going. The lights are now on so I can see. So here is a really beautiful report that our partner Save the Sound produces every few years. This is called the Long Island Sound Report Card. And it basically looks at the health of all the embayments that empty out into Long Island Sound. The Bronx River is one such water body that does feed the Long Island Sound, as well as the Hudson River estuary. So we're kind of in a unique position on the Bronx River where we're kind of shared by two main groups. And so it's kind of interesting that we get to share our data and learn a lot about what's happening from two different sets of scientific communities, which makes us feel very special. But this is a recent look at the latest result from the Long Island Sound. As you can see, we are located on the Western Narrows, and so on the leftern portion of this map. And red definitely means bad, green means good. So no surprises there. It's a heavily urbanized portion of the Sound, and so there's a big, contribution from the city. Lots of, pollution, things that lead to algal blooms, low dissolved oxygen, and things like that. So we participate in the study. We'll share a little bit more about that in a bit. And so our data helps to inform this report card. So we hope that one day our portion of this basin will be nice and green, like the Central Basin and the Eastern Basin, but we are not there yet. We have plenty of work to do. And so I think I'm going to kick it over to Isabella to talk a little bit about our work on the Bronx River this year. If there's no more questions, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, so here are two pictures of the way we participate in the Unified Water Study. It's a two-part study. So on the left is a picture of me using our sonde that they donate to us, which collects things like dissolved oxygen, depth, the amount of chlorophyll in the water even. And then on the right, we throw a rake into the river and scrape the bottom and collect macrophytes. It is the only green part of our report card because our hypothesis is the water is too dirty for the algae to grow, but we don't usually find anything when we're testing for macrophytes. It's a really interesting study and a totally different way to collect data than the way we used to do it with different turbidity monitors. A sonde is a really interesting way to collect data. You want to go to the next slide, Christian? Thank you. Yeah. And so the state of the Bronx River this year was not too bleak. We saw a lot of beautiful fish, higher dissolved oxygen this year. We had kind of lucky water testing days because we happened to come before the rain, since you guys know it rained every single weekend all summer. We're on Thursdays. We noticed high water temperatures, which increase the amount of sludge that's in the water. It seemed to be having just a very hard time moving. We saw less fish than usual this year, less birds. It was my first year spending every day on the summer in the water, and it was kind of sad to hear stories of how the fish and wildlife were last summer and how they were apparent this year. We did a lot of work with a organization or a partner named Boomi, who helped us look at flood risk along the river to update our watershed protection plan. We'll talk more about that as the slides go on. And we took a huge focus on looking at the outfalls in Westchester County and the ways that they may be contributing to water quality down where we are in Starlight and all throughout the river. Next. So as many of you may know, the Enterococcus test is our favorite. It's a fecal indicator bacteria. Government, the New York City government and state and all across the nation, organizations are struggling to voice the concern that wastewater has on an ecosystem. The way that we're able to show how much water is being dumped in the Bronx River is basically only through Enterococcus testing, because the lack of oversight on pipes throughout the city is pretty lax. It's just a sad state of affairs. And so, as we have been reforming the Enterococcus testing protocol that we use, we reduced the number of sites that we were doing to focus only on the Bronx rather than all throughout Westchester. And rather than the usual sites in Westchester, we did targeted outfall studies, which will be in a couple of slides.
Isabella, do you want to describe what this photograph is showing?
Oh, yeah. So this is the Enterococcus test. The way that it works is you add a yeast that is like marked so that it shows up under black light, and it cooks in an oven and uh, binds and lets the enterococcus grow within the water. And when you put it in these sheets, it puts them into cells, and you're able to get a count number for the amount of bacteria within the sample. On the left is really bad. That's probably like, I want to say that's 18,000 parts of enterococcus. And then on the right is still not good. That would probably be about 200. And the EPA guideline is 30 for how much enterococcus should be in a water system. And so these were our monthly averages. We continued to see an inconsistency, peaks on wet days always, but as you can tell, almost every single reading was above that little dashed line at the bottom, which is the number we are trying to have every single reading. Just a lot of poop, definitely a lot of poop in this water. No doubt about it, would not swim in it quite yet. So this is the targeted outfalls that I was talking about a little bit earlier. So you'll hear us say words like CSO and MS4. A CSO is a combined sewage outfall. It's meant to have sewage in it. An MS4 is a municipal storm drain. It should never or very rarely have sewage in it. It will only have stormwater and wastewater, which does have some fecal indicator bacteria. It does have some enterococcus because dogs poop on the street, birds poop on the street, but people don't, and there shouldn't be that much. So we went up into Westchester and looked at a map of all the pipes, and Westchester actually doesn't have any CSOs, so they really shouldn't have that much enterococcus.
Well,
And we
Westchester has
went to each
some
of these pipes
CSOs, but there's no CSOs in Westchester on the Bronx River.
On the Bronx River, correct. Sorry, I misspoke. Um, yes, and we stuck bottles in these individual pipes to see if they were really just storm drains. And if you go to the next slide, the data kind of said, no, they're not just storm drains. Yeah, every single outfall we tested highly for enterococcus in a way that's not uniform with a lack of sewage. Different pipes had crazy high peaks, even just right next to each other. And we think that this is just a degradation of the infrastructure. As we dug more into it, it seems like there are some loopholes. And as the municipalities investigated, there were potentially illegal connections, like people had built large properties, and rather than build a septic tank or pay for getting their sewage treated, they put a joiner onto the MS4 and hope nobody found out. We're starting to hopefully find out and try to get money to help these municipalities to start making these repairs, tracking it down. It was a really difficult process. We literally had to look on a map, find the pipe in the river, which, we work for river access. It's not always easy to get to the river, and then walk along a rocky, bumpy shore to go to the pipe. It seems like it will be a really difficult process for cities and small groups to start working on, especially with the limited budget. And we're going to try to help get that ball rolling as much as possible in this next year. And as Christian was saying, watershed protections are not really coming as they should be. The past few years have been really difficult to hear updates on legislation. As you all know, earlier this year, we talked about it in an eco team meeting. The Sackett versus EPA decision reduced the amount of protections. Sorry, I also live in New York. And that reduction in protections led to a weird gray area now for what can happen in a wetland and what can be dumped in a wetland. The Freshwater Wetlands Protection Act just said that if a local municipality has watershed protections, then no dumping of pesticides can occur on those wetlands. The way that this would differ from the original EPA guideline is agriculture is exempt from the Clean Water Act. Agriculture does not have to oblige, farming does not have to oblige with the Clean Water Act. They get an exemption. If a state puts in a watershed protection, agriculture is not exempt. The majority of the protest to these two bills was from small farms and agricultures, citing their importance to the local economy. I'm like losing my words. And that is also why they no longer wanted, or they didn't want protections for Class C streams. The Class C streams bill has been up since 2018. So it was initially put into the House in 2018. It was voted on in 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023, and denied every single time. Class C streams are what the Bronx River is. It is fishable and no contact activities. It is not for drinking water, and it's not for waters that you can recreate in. The reason the Bronx River is a Class C stream is because it has been polluted to the state of a Class C stream. Every organization that works with Class C streams really was upset about this decision. It is hard to know that when a water body gets polluted so heavily that it no longer has its original status of protection, it loses the ability to be protected. It is hard that the government continues to prioritize the economy over the ecology. It just doesn't really make sense, especially when we've seen time and time again that protecting rivers before continued pollution is cheaper than trying to clean up what happens when pollution occurs. The Bronx River Alliance does not have a super strong position in legislation for waterways and watershed protections, but we try to use our voice whenever the organization tries to use its voice whenever possible to support and be a voice for the river. And I think that we're just kind of wondering what all of you think on ways that we could be louder for the river and better. And if there's anything you've seen that's coming up in the future that we should be loud about, or if you think that like these bills should have been vetoed, this was a great thing, and we should be quiet and try to help the river in another way. And would love to just get some feedback right now on what you guys think about these things. You can just speak up if you have any ideas or thoughts. If you knew about this, hate it, love it.
I'm curious as to like which farms and agricultural groups were the biggest opponents of it. Like was it mostly small farms or was it like big, like is there any room for adjusting the language? I don't know. I'm just curious who opposed it.
Yeah, so it seemed like I think it's called the Farmers Bureau Association. It is like the voice of farmers from what I could read on the internet. I am not a farmer, I'm not familiar. But what it seemed like they were mostly opposed to is the ambiguity of the restrictions and of the protections, less than the protections themselves. They continually said farmers want the earth to be clean and good and not polluted. And the problem, especially for small farms, is hiring a lawyer to try to protect themselves from large EPA fines. I think environmentalists, for the most part, don't really care about small amounts of manure and small amounts of pesticides. And I think that's what the farmers were really worried about getting fined over, like tens of millions of dollars for pesticide use or nitrogen based fertilizers on their private land going into, they use language like land that gets sometimes wet being a wetland, um, and just really the fear that they're going to be gone after by the government for violating this protection because they can't understand the language and because it's ambiguous to begin with. And that was the Sackett v. EPA decision as well, I think, was just like they didn't want to recognize that part of their land as a wetland because it was hard to know where the literal line from when they could put a pesticide and when they couldn't was going to be, more so than they were like, well, we don't ever want to worry about putting pesticides in the water. That's not our job. So I think that there needs to be maybe a bridge between farmers and environmental orgs because I think we all want the same thing. And this was more of a money based decision for them rather. And that it seemed like the government didn't want to make the accommodations to make it possible for an environmental org to get this win because it would have been much harder than letting the farmers just not have to do anything for right now, from what I could tell.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds
I
like
don't know if that.
maybe working with some of these farmers and trying or changing the language a little bit might be a strategy, and maybe involving some um, groups like the apprentices, people like that, to kind of talk to them and work on that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's a great idea.
I have two questions. Are there any particular like properties or kind of areas you're particularly concerned with this impacting in the watershed?
No, it's really everywhere. I would say that the Bronx River would really benefit from additional protections of Class C streams. It would help us have a point to argue, like in the context of the alliance, to say like this is a protected waterway. We have this list of protections, and they're not being followed. So this is the way that the state government is going to be responsible. I think that's what the governor was afraid of in passing this bill was there was no budgetary allotment for these protections, and there's the concern that this would double the budget of the DEC.
Sure. No, I guess I
I,
mean particularly in the freshwater wetland piece, less so the Class C stream piece.
yeah, so for freshwater wetlands, I think that that comes more into concern for larger rivers. Like I know the Hudson has a lot of wetlands, and especially upstate, there's a lot more farmland. I'm not as familiar with the rivers wetlands up there, but there's a lot of them and there's a lot of farms. So right now, the Bronx River specifically is trying to build wetlands and create wetlands. And if continued dumping can happen, while those are being built, it kind of becomes a moot point. I don't have any particular sites that I'm thinking of here. It's just sort of in general, all of these orgs are trying to rebuild this natural infrastructure that the river used to have. And it seems like that's not being valued in the same
Well,
way by all groups.
that we know that a lot of the folks in Westchester, I always have to Westchester into the conversation, but they have wonderful lawns and backyards and things, and people are using fertilizers, maybe consciously, and it's definitely creating some eutrophication, so some fertilizing of algae in the river. Um, And perhaps, having a protected designation would make it easier to have conversations with people to get them to change their actions in a way that would benefit the river, maybe. I know, like the
For
golf
sure, yeah.
courses upstream are definitely putting fertilizer on their greens.
Yeah, I don't think fertilizers are regulated differently than pesticides, though. I just wanted to clarify that piece. Like they're I don't, to my knowledge, you don't have to have many permits or approvals for fertilizers, but you do certainly for pesticides. So one thing that I wanted to flag is the state just, well, a year ago, but they're working on the draft regs right now, updated the state freshwater wetland regulations, and they will afford protection to all wetlands, or basically they'll expand the definition of unusual local importance, which is a designation that they have now within the regulations, to include all wetlands in an urban area as protected and all wetlands in flood prone areas. That has a definition that I'm not familiar with yet. But those are expected to be released to the public in probably mid 2024 and be active in 2025. And they're also removing the authority of the map itself to provide any sort of jurisdictional determination. They're basically putting the onus on the owner itself to say, I do not have wetlands on my property. Wetlands also, in a couple of instances, are defined as vernal pools with amphibian breeding populations of certain species. So I just want to clarify, that is one way in which we will have dramatically improved protections over the course of the next a little over a year. And in order to spray pesticides, no matter what, you have to have permits. So that's one thing. I think the question of fertilizer is a totally different one, of more engagement and getting people on board with not necessarily doing that, but it's certainly, unfortunately, not a regulated activity. So I just wanted to clarify that. But there will be a public, like I said, there will be a public comment period next summer, and that's something that certainly we all should speak up on, about what sort of provisions we want to make sure are included or not.
Do you think it would be useful for us to try to identify locations where there are vernal pools in the upper part of the watershed?
I don't, it's not just vernal pools, it's vernal pools with breeding populations of specific salamanders, I believe. And like I said, we haven't seen the language yet, so we don't know exactly how this is going to be conveyed. But the onus becomes on the property owner to confirm that they don't have any of those things. So I'm not necessarily sure, like I said, we won't know until we see the draft regs, kind of, if that would be helpful. We have certainly, parks have stepped up our mapping game pretty significantly in order to try to help partners advocate for this. And I wouldn't say it necessarily worked. It just happened to kind of come along a beneficial timeline. But there are, that was all done through advocacy. And so I'm happy to kind of try to put you guys in contact with the people who led that effort. But it's mostly, Riverkeeper did a lot of it with partners. And so I'm hopeful that that will provide some additional protections that will, even though it's not directly, waterways themselves, but it should have watershed benefits that trickle down into streams.
We'd definitely be interested in the advocacy piece too, because the apprentices are really interested in getting involved in things like that.
Yeah,
I will share what I can when they come out.
Sure. Thank you for offering.
And that brought up a really good point in my mind that like regulations do not and permitting do not always guarantee responsible use by all parties or reasonable use, and that there could be a role for us in just communicating what the best way to use your pesticides would be, even if it's not regulated by the government. And maybe if people are willing to commit to clean water just for fun without the government down their neck, we could help them do that. So
For sure.
this was really great.
And I know, yeah. And I know there's also several like sustainable native plant wild landscaping firms that actually are in Westchester. And I don't know if you've connected with any of those groups as well, but like that, not saying like you need to necessarily cooperate with business or, you know, from like a payment perspective and all of that, but it might be worth kind of at least trying to talk to them about what, you know, what they're seeing, anything you guys can do on the advocacy end to support each other's goals. But yeah, I do know there are several that are quite active and doing well in Westchester.
Yeah, we'll have to look them up for sure.
That's great to know. We're definitely trying to build Westchester connections in these coming months and years. It's the key to a full river system. All of us working together and continuing to share.
Sure. I just dropped in the chat. Planet Wild is the main one that I'm aware of. But I know there's a lot more.
Sure.
Thank you. Just in the interest of time, I think we're going to keep it moving. But if folks have follow-up questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can always email us. We'll, get back to you. Yeah. You want to keep going?
Yeah, you got it.
I was going to say, I mean, Becca probably could speak to this more than me, but as the State of the Estuary report noted, that river herring numbers remain low. We're seeing that again on the Bronx River. Very little usage of the fish passage, which is shown here at East 182nd Street on the Bronx River. This passage has a camera in it, so we're able to look at what's swimming up and down. We can actually count the different species that are using this passage, and it's just not being utilized in the numbers that we want it to be. And so it's a concern. We had been restocking the Bronx River with native alewife herring for a number of years. And for the second year in a row now, we had to cancel the restocking because we just had not been able to successfully locate and source fish, either from Long Island or from Connecticut, where there used to be very reliable fish runs. Those are not doing very well either. So this is really a region-wide thing. And we know from conversations with Rebecca and other folks at Parks NRG that unregulated fishing practices, specifically related to bycatch in the Atlantic, we're seeing lower numbers. So, part of this is how responsible fishing companies and operations are as they're, going out and collecting their fish. And they might be catching a lot of alewife and other sensitive species by accident, and then those fish are just not getting the chance to live their healthy lives here. So, any comments on that? If not, we'll keep going.
I recently learned that nobody knows why our fish passage doesn't work. I was talking to a professor at Montclair, and he was asking why our fish passage doesn't work. They have no idea. Fish don't like it for no reason.
So I want to just clarify. I don't think that it doesn't work. We have fish pass every year. We just don't have them passing in high numbers. But we have not had a full monitoring season since 2019. So we're missing like the entire month of May and June for the last 4 years. So we're not sure how good it is, but we know that when you're trying to build a population and you're seeing numbers crash in very, very reliable runs all throughout New England, like it's going to be bad. your return on investment is not very high. Bride's Brook, which is where we usually stock from, normally passes like hundreds of thousands of fish. And it's in Connecticut. And this past year, I'm not even sure they broke 100,000 fish. They're seeing like, 50 to 90% reductions in their overall run. So I just want to say it's not just us. However, fish passages in general show much lower efficacy than dam removal. Like it's documented that they're roughly 30 to 40% overall of what passage should or could be if there is no barrier in place. So I just want to clarify, it's not great. We know it's not great, but I don't think it's due to like a flawed design or anything like that. That's just what passages are. And then on the flip side of it, we don't have good numbers. The most we ever got up to was we never even broke 100. So when you talk about 50 to 90% reduction from that perspective, we're talking about, 10 to 20 fish a year if we're following regional trends.
And sorry, I must have misspoke. My point was the fish passage works. It runs more often than most fish passages. The water levels are really good. It's perfectly designed. It just seems like it's not as effective as other fish passages in other rivers. The fish just don't use it as frequently or in the same numbers as other rivers given our populations. And with, I mean, not this year, but the huge dumps of alewife when you put them at the bottom and they don't go up and swim away. It's
So
kind of funny.
the alewife, they are restocked up above the dam.
Right.
Yeah.
They're stocked above the dam and they're supposed to breed above the dam and then return to the river. So that's the other thing. If they leave and then are not able to return, then it's harder to build a population. But they're not quite as what's the word that I'm looking for? Drawn to their river maybe is like as strongly as salmon are. They will stray and follow, a group to a different river if they need to. But yeah, I think bycatch is the biggest one. We just have not, I mean, the Bronx River has been blocked until 2015 had been blocked to fish for over 400 years. So it's going to take time to build a run, but certainly, we might not be seeing those numbers be as high as we would want, even if the dam was removed. Bycatch and trawling is one of the biggest threats to the fish populations overall. There's only so much we can do if we don't fix the regional trends.
I do see two hands raised. Lily, I saw your hand first, and then I'll go to Daniel.
Hey, sorry to join late. Just on this topic, when my previous job was with Trout Unlimited, we did trout in the classroom, and I think about like 20 years ago, students were able to release their fingerlings into the Bronx River, and then this alewife project started, and it was, DEC had decided that they were not gonna, have those two species being released into the stream together, citing that it was a issue with the sensitive alewife. I mean, the TIC fingerlings are like 2 inches most. Most of them don't survive, the season after they're released because they're very small. But it's an education program. Do you think sometime in the future, given the trends that you're seeing and not being able to source alewife for stocking, that it might potentially be open to trout in the classroom students, especially ones that are like vulnerable that can't travel outside of the city, maybe because and there was some specific groups that, most of them go up to the watershed to release their trout because that's where New York City water comes from. That's the education program. But then there are students that are, handicapped or need special access that just never get to participate in that opportunity. Just wondering if that might be an option in the future.
It's a good question.
That's interesting. Yeah.
The Bronx River, I know that during the summer it gets pretty warm, and I know that trout, they really like cold water and they really are quite finicky about their water parameters. And I'd be curious to know if the Bronx River could support a more sensitive fish.
I agree from that perspective too. We have water quality data and, you know, temperature data that we could certainly look at that for. But yeah, I know we've looked at trout in a couple of places with even like tidal streams that aren't dammed, that have better flushing from both the freshwater and the saltwater side, and they're still too warm. So I would love to look at that a little bit more. I think it's worth reconsidering. But yeah, certainly there's a couple of spots that might not be great habitat for cold water fish, but we should certainly look.
Yeah, definitely worth the investigation.
Yeah, thank you.
Daniel?
I think the points that were even said, like there are other things in the way, like we also have the underwater weir near our office in Starlight Park, so there are other impediments, but I'll leave it to the experts. Thanks.
Yeah, I guess long story short is that there are definitely obstacles that we need to be tackling to get these populations to rebound. Dam removal is a big one, and we're excited to see how those processes are going. There's definitely a movement now to take down as many dams as possible across Westchester County, including quite a number on the Bronx River.
We got funding to look at all 4 of them.
Yeah, including the one pictured here. So that's, I think, one of our big goals in the future is to open up connectivity between the Bronx River and the ocean to make sure those fish can swim freely and without having to climb up and down these fish passages. Lily, next go.
I was just wondering, is there any fishery in particular that you know is catching a lot of alewife? That, I mean, that could be an advocacy thing, right? Like, you know, maybe don't support this fish.
Yeah, we can ask partners at Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, Connecticut Deep. They're who stocks for us, but they also have they're different from parks in that they actually are a regulator, so they can say some things that we can't say. So they did actually submit testimony to NOAA a year or so ago, basically saying like, hey, we monitor this, we have data that when the bycatch rules the trawling rules were suspended in April of 2020, as the fish were supposed to migrate in, we had immediate population crashes. And it's one where I think it's certainly very much regional, interstate sort of advocacy would be really helpful, but we can get the rest of that information from Connecticut and see where it went, because I honestly haven't heard, but most of it is the staging area, kind of like Rhode Island, Connecticut, where they hold in about March and April, waiting for the water temperature to warm up to start moving into the inland tributaries.
That would be really interesting. Thanks.
Sure.
Or comments on fish populations. On a lighter note, we conducted some presence absence surveys for freshwater species. So basically, not very scientific, but we walked out into the river and just took note of whether or not we were seeing specific species. And we did this in response to the devastating fish kill that took place in the freshwater portion of the Bronx River last summer, where we lost thousands of freshwater species, from white suckers to catfish to sunfish, darters, everything. And we wanted to see how quickly those populations would be rebounding after such an event. And so between May and September of this year, as we were going out and doing other things, we were just taking note of what was happening within the water. And we did actually find quite a lot of fish populations within our sort of survey areas. There is a video. I'm not going to play this video for you right now because I just want to be mindful of time. But I do want to share the video with you. It's about 3 minutes long, and it is basically a compilation of underwater footage that we took of the fish. And it's, I think, kind of fun to watch. And so I do just want you to share in the fun. I want to drop the link in the chat for you to enjoy on your own time. And if you don't have correct access to this video, please let me know, but it should be viewable to anyone in the public. We did see plenty of fish, lots of sunfish, lots of suckers. We saw a full-grown American eel in Muskrat Cove near 233rd Street. So a fish that is definitely able to climb up and down dams without too much of an issue. It was great to see that eel. It's the biggest one I've ever actually seen with my own eyes on the Bronx River. So that was very exciting this year. So that's a good thing that we wanted to share. Go back to my slideshow if I can. Share my screen. Okay, so switching gears slightly to floatable waste, project waste, waterway and street trash elimination is a program that we've been running since 2016 that engages volunteers and students in the removal and quantification of floating trash from the Bronx River. The reason being, we want to look at what kind of material is entering the river and see if we can figure out where it's coming from and how to maybe do some targeted outreach. For example, if we're seeing tons of Dunkin' Donuts coffee cups, maybe we need to talk to Dunkin' Donuts. There's a big dredging project taking place at the typical location for this program. And so we were forced to move this trash boom, excuse me, a little bit further upstream to a somewhat less suitable location that seemed to not do well with high water events when it rained too much. So long story short, we just didn't have as many of these cleanup events as we would have liked to this year. But we were still able to get some data. And here are our kind of summarized results. They look very similar to pretty much every other year we've done this program, where styrofoam waste is dominating the material that is being removed from the trash boom. Following behind that is single-use plastic items, things like straws and forks and cups, and then basically everything else fits into the rest of the pie chart. This is just a quick look at the last 3 years of project waste data. I don't know why Excel flipped this one pie chart in a different angle, but they basically look very similar to each other. The amount of styrofoam seems to fluctuate slightly, but overall it is the major material that we're finding in the Bronx River. Which is interesting given the styrofoam bans that New York City and Westchester County passed in 2019 and 2020. So clearly, again, as Isabella mentioned, just because something gets put into law does not mean it gets enforced and does not mean that people are being held accountable. And so this is definitely one of those areas where we do want to be pushing back and saying, hey, this material is bad for the river. This material is bad for wildlife. This material is bad for human beings, right? Like we don't want to be seeing these things choking the Bronx River. So interesting news. This is sort of the follow-up to the report from the Harbor Estuary Program. We are kind of seeing a reduction in the amount of trash removed per project waste event. I can't really say that our monitoring efforts here have been exactly the same every year. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And I'm not going to say that there is less trash in the Bronx River. All I'm going to say is that these results are interesting. And we do definitely need to look into this further to learn more about this. But it seems kind of like there might be less garbage being removed every single time we're doing project waste. So cautiously optimistic that this might be a trend. We'll know more in the future. So that's kind of our quick, I guess it wasn't that quick, but that's our sort of State of the Bronx River report. Any questions or comments on the data that we shared? Okay, we'll keep it moving.
You made me think of enhanced producer responsibility. Have you been involved with any of that?
Enhanced.
Because enhanced producer responsibility, I've seen styrofoam come through my kitchen in various forms from various sources, and it's way beyond the scope of what we do. But we need to what should be happening is that the production of these things needs to be reduced and eliminated. And I thought there was a bill in Albany that was called what I just labeled it enhanced producer responsibility, but I don't think it's gone anywhere.
I can say that it does not ring a bell to me, but I will look into it. But I think you bring up an excellent point, and the legislation that was taking aim at styrofoam was really just looking at like takeout containers and like food products. That's styrofoam often gets carried in, but it wasn't looking at things like building insulation, which is often used in construction, and things like styrofoam packaging. Like if you order like a flat screen TV, it's going to come wrapped in styrofoam. That legislation did not, impact those aspects of production. And that's a lot of what we're seeing in the rivers, those like styrofoam peanuts, packing pellets, and things like that. So there's definitely, we have a lot of grounds to fight back against this with this data. Say, this legislation was well intended, but not only is it not being enforced, but it didn't go far enough in the first place, right? Uh, and Lily, with your apprentices in mind, I think these are some things that we can be, engaging young people in, to be speaking up about and saying that these are things that are concerning to them and that we want legislators to be doing more to advance protections for our waterways.
Well,
We have, lots of the data at our hands.
yeah, I mean, that was kind of my question too, is like, because I don't see the styrofoam in like the bodegas and stuff as much anymore, but Hunts Point is such a commercial. Like, I was wondering if it was more packaging and stuff that you were seeing, or if it was like coffee cups and things like that.
Yeah. We're seeing, I mean, we do see the occasional coffee cup and the occasional plate. I will say that over the years, those things have gone down. But the amount of overall styrofoam, it's hard to say what has changed. Um, and once it gets into the river and it gets into those like small, tiny pieces, that all looks the same. And, the worst part is that fish see that as food, unfortunately, and they often will consume that. It's a bummer. And, there's so much more work that needs to be done when it comes to the way we move our products around and the considerations for single use, petroleum products, right? Because all these things do come from oil ultimately.
Do you have a read on any of the main sources for some of this debris through Project Waste? I mean, so you mentioned Hunts Point. I mean, is there any potential to identify how much of this is just coming off from runoff, or do you monitor it after rain? Was that just an annual event?
Good question. So Project Waste initially took place every 2 weeks during the warm season. And since its inception, it has expanded across the watershed going north. And so there's 2 more trash booms that are maintained by Westchester Parks. So they basically break the river up into a couple of reaches between White Plains and Tuckahoe, and then between Tuckahoe and 233rd Street. And then again, the next boom down is in Hunts Point. So we know all the material that we're catching is only coming south of Tuckahoe, basically. And there's Endico Potato is a food distribution center in Mount Vernon. And I'm not entirely sure how well their waste management practices are, right? If they secure all their dumpsters properly, if they're not being careless with the way that they do things. I don't know, but it would be good for us to maybe go knock on their door or send them an email, just say that, we're seeing materials. We would love to talk to you about how you can be a supporter for the Bronx River. But it's a great question. Yeah, over the years, you've seen that each of the trash booms has a very similar composition of material that comes out of them. So it's pretty widespread. Ooh, the lights turned off for me again. We did do street trash surveys as well, and compared what came off of the sidewalks in Westchester County and the Bronx to what was coming out of the river. And it seems like the most buoyant objects are obviously making their way through the storm drains to the water. Styrofoam is, the most buoyant thing I can think of. And so that might be why we're seeing so much of it, is that it's so mobile, right? It gets around so quickly. And maybe that's why there's just so much of it. Yeah. Okay, so here's our quick look at our program year in review. So a little bit lighter note, this is going to focus a lot on volunteers. Volunteers continue to be, such an integral part of our water quality monitoring program. They increase our capacity to really look at all 24 miles of the Bronx River. It would be very hard for one small team to do, and volunteers make this possible for us. So we really just cannot thank them enough for their work and their dedication to keeping this river clean and beautiful. So these are some water quality monitoring volunteers collecting enterococcus samples from the Bronx River this summer. Here are volunteers helping out with Project Waste. I want to give a special thanks to Team Rubicon, who managed to remove in one single event over 1,100 pounds of trash from the Muskrat Cove trash boom. Very impressive. A lot of this stuff wasn't actually in the boom, just in the riverbed. And it was things like tires and scooters and a parking meter, which contributed to that weight. But nonetheless, we were thankful for their hard work. And then we held our first ever Water and Woodlands event this summer. And so this was basically an immersive event to showcase the beautiful relationship between a forest and river ecosystem. So the role that trees and plants and healthy soils play in keeping a waterway clean and healthy. And we did this at Burke Avenue Bridge in the Bronx River Forest, which in my opinion is one of the most beautiful parts of the Bronx River watershed, especially within the Bronx itself in New York City. It was a wonderful event. We did water quality testing, we had arts and crafts, we had nature walks, we saw really cool animals like this gigantic snapping turtle. We learned a lot about the native trees and their role in the ecosystem and how they benefit humans. And it was just such a fabulous event. And we are really, really looking forward to replicating this next year and maybe seeing if we can do it in different parks along the Bronx River where we have really well-established forests. And so if you weren't able to come out to that one, we hope to see you at a future event. It's really a fun time. And then definitely this was kind of our main spectacle this year, but we partnered with New York City Audubon and led birding tours by canoe. And so our canoeing program is definitely our most popular program that we run at the Bronx River Alliance. And we just get hordes of people who come out and want to get on the water and experience the river from this unique perspective. And so what we did was we handed all the paddlers binoculars and we talked to them about the different species of birds that use the Bronx River estuary. We saw osprey catching fish in front of our faces. We had herons flying over our heads. We saw tons of species, really enigmatic birds, up close and personal. And everyone seemed to have a wonderful time. And those paddles sold out really quickly. And so it's clear that people were enjoying themselves, and we're definitely looking forward to doing more of this in the future. And we consider it a great way of building stewardship, because when people see how beautiful and how valuable these resources are, we believe they'll be more inclined to, want to protect them and advocate for them. So this is an advocacy piece as much as it is, for the enjoyment of the Bronx River itself. So I encourage it. If you like to canoe and if you like birds, or even if you don't like either of those things, I still encourage it anyway. It's just a fun activity. So we hope to see you out there next year. And then I want to highlight the Pratt Delta Cities Coastal Resilience Studio. So this is part of the Pratt Institute's program offerings for grad students. This pulls in folks from architecture and urban design, ecology, and lots of different disciplines to take a holistic look at different parts of New York City, and specifically looking at things like access to nature, opportunities for climate change resiliency, ways to improve our infrastructure and transportation and whatnot. And these students looked at the Hunts Point Peninsula as a case study, and they came out to engage the public in some activities to learn about their perspectives on the waterfront, where there's issues accessing the water, where there's issues getting transportation along the Bronx River, where people are experiencing flooding and all that kind of stuff. And they've wrapped it up into a really, really excellent report that kind of showcases where there's opportunities to increase the resiliency of the Bronx River to things like flooding from hurricanes and whatnot. They will be giving this report on Thursday evening at 5 p.m. virtually on Zoom. So if you're interested, please feel free to drop in. If you can't make it, they have shared their slide deck with us that has their findings, and they've done a really, really good job. So if you want to look at that, shoot me an email and I can send that to you. And I want to plug our air quality monitoring program. We've expanded our monitoring sites up to 29th Street. Or I guess we had that site last year. We expanded it to where Bolinville. There's an elementary school that partnered with us, and the air quality sensor there is mounted to the side of the school building. And so we're getting, again, hyper-local air quality data all along the Bronx River corridor within the Bronx to look at how the different landscapes, different urban landscapes have an impact on local air quality. So we've seen some things that are not very surprising. The closer you are to a park or green space, the better overall the air quality is on average. If you live, sensors are placed near transportation corridors, that air quality is obviously worse. We're also working with students like Lily's apprentices down in Rocking the Boat to do more local air quality monitoring using handheld sensors. And so kind of pairing those two things together to see how much we can learn. This is a quick look at what the dashboard that hosts our air quality data looks like. And this is easily accessible, and we encourage everyone to sign up to view this data 24/7 free of charge, because we want people to understand what is in the air they're breathing, and to also be advocates for clean air in New York City, and especially in the Bronx. So if you're interested in signing up, please do reach out to us and we will get you a login for that dashboard. We've also been engaging in an update to the watershed management plan, as Isabella mentioned earlier. And it's kind of wonderful that this is taking place, and that the Pratt students were also doing very similar work, and they kind of complement each other in a beautiful way. But our consultant, Boomi Environmental, has been looking at as many opportunities as possible for improving conditions along the Bronx River in the context of climate change. So things like flooding and urban heat island effect and whatnot. So the culmination of our public meetings and all the surveying and things that we've been doing is this updated plan that will be released in 2024. It's going to be a guiding document that will take us through the next 10 years of priority restoration projects in the Bronx River. So we're really excited to see that plan come to fruition and then start to break ground on those projects. This is just a quick example of some of the things we're looking at. This would be called a right-of-way green infrastructure. And so where you're looking at on the left is a rain garden or a bioswale that's been built into the sidewalk. And this captures stormwater to prevent the street from flooding, to prevent our sewer system from being overwhelmed with rainwater and leading to sewer overflows into our waterways. It beautifies the street. It creates habitat for wildlife. It helps to reduce the urban heat island effect. And it also helps to clean air quality. And so these things offer many co-benefits, and we're looking for as many locations as possible to be adding more green infrastructure to our watershed, so that we can avoid things like the right-hand picture, which is puddles forming, which can be a nuisance as well as, damaging and dangerous to the communities where these things are taking place. So these are just some of the things that this watershed management plan is incorporating. It's just a quick look at the process, looking at a map of proposed green infrastructure projects across the Bronx. We brought in the municipalities across Westchester to weigh in and give their perspectives on what they want to see in their towns and villages. And so it's been a wonderful process, and we're really excited for what comes next year. So we're looking ahead to 2024. Our mission as the Bronx River Alliance and as the Bronx River Eco Team is to create a fishable, swimmable Bronx River. It's not as far-fetched of an idea as you might think. We're not there yet, right? Like, we're not currently at a place where we can safely swim inside the Bronx River, and we want to be. And so we are focused on continuing to investigate and report on point source pollution. So we'll definitely be going back up and looking for more of those MS4 pipes and sampling them and seeing which ones are polluting the river and reporting those and documenting them with as much detail as possible. We also want to continue to engage the community in hands-on science and the enjoyment of nature. So encouraging folks to join us for water quality testing, for project waste, and then for things like nature walks, birding, getting on canoes and enjoying the river, and as many activities as we can think of to make sure that folks are getting the most from this beautiful resource. So the question that I want to pose now is, looking at the activities that we did and the data that we've collected, are there any other things that we should be focusing on or ways that we can be engaging our communities in any of this work? There's no wrong answers. If you have anything on your mind, please feel free to share it. Nobody has any thoughts? You all are kind of shy tonight. Well, our inboxes are always open. And if anything ever crosses your mind in the future that you want to share with us, like, oh, I would love to see you all do an event, looking at, I don't know, the fruit trees that live along the Bronx River and, the way that people used to use fruit trees in New York City, something like that. We're open to any suggestions. We're lovers of trees. We are tree huggers. We love our native plants. We love our medicinal plants. We love our insects. We love our fish. There's a space along the Bronx River for everybody and every interest. And if there are activities and things that we can be doing that you think would be engaging or exciting, we would always love to hear that, of course. Other slides do I have here? Okay. Again, Lily, I'm thinking of your apprentices. We would love to get more input on sewer outfalls. And so this sign right here on the left is a wet weather discharge sign, which is, I hate the wording on these signs. I think they're confusing. I think they don't make sense. I think most people probably walk past the sign and have no idea what it's talking about. But this is what the city does to let the the public know where there are combined sewer outfalls. So wherever you see one of these green signs, there's a CSO nearby. And it's basically telling you that during wet weather, not to do these activities listed on the sign, swimming, fishing, boating, and whatnot, because there will be sewage being released at this point. We always want to be keeping an eye on these releases, but we are aware that sometimes sewage gets released during dry weather, and that is not okay. And so we would definitely love some help with keeping tabs on these pipes. And so 311 has a section on their website to report this. And every CSO has a specific code. So if you call 311 or if you access 311 from your phone or mobile device, you can report on the specific outfall that you're standing near. And you can tell 311 and the DEP what it is that you're seeing. If you're seeing a release of sewage during a beautiful sunny day, that is definitely something that we want to be reporting because that should not be happening. So this could be a way of, that we're engaging students and that we're engaging volunteers and things. We're going to call this, maybe watershed watchdogs. We can play with this name. There's interest in, being more of an advocate for the Bronx River. Then we would love to talk more about this at some point. Any thoughts on this? Do folks think this is a good idea? Are there things that we could be doing to do this reporting more effectively?
Christian, I put this in the chat because I can't read the sign. Does it give a note like report if you're seeing an outfall? That would be great. Too good, wouldn't it?
It does, yeah. In the little tiny text there, it does say, if you see a discharge during dry weather, please call 311. And then this specific outfall is HP009. And so if you call 311, you'd say, hi, I'm standing on HP009 in Soundview Park. It is releasing sewage. There's a smell, there's cloudy water. And it's a beautiful sunny day, and I don't think this should be happening. And that would be a report that you can make.
I mean, I think that's really interesting because we weren't really thinking of it from a reporting to 311 standpoint this summer. We were thinking of it as reporting for data and like into like our records. So, that might be something that's effective. The problem is that some of them are underwater at like different tides. So it's hard to tell. Like, I mean, we would go sometimes and our eyes would be burning, and Ethan was really looking at comparing this one, the Soundview CSO, to ones across the river, and it was just really interesting, just comparing them. But it was just the challenge was tides, basically.
Yeah, the estuary is a tricky location because of the tides, for sure. So that definitely makes it hard, definitely. But if you're seeing another pipe that's maybe not a CSO pipe, but like a private pipe coming from like a business or something, that's emptying into the river, some of those could be permitted, some of them might not be permitted. It would be good to, especially the ones around the Hunts Point Market. I'd be really curious to see what's coming out of those pipes, because a lot of them are continuously dribbling water from that facility. And I don't know what's in that water. I've never tested it. But it would be good to, keep tabs on where we're seeing, liquid being spilled into the river.
Yeah. Has anyone ever mapped out and identified the ones we do know the source of, and the ones that are kind of like, I don't know where this is coming from, up and down the river?
Oh, so I know that New York City has pretty well, maintained maps of the CSO pipes. But the other pipes, I am not really sure how well they're mapped. Seen maps of them. Like, for example, across from Concrete Plant Park, there's a Prologis facility, and so it's an Amazon facility. There's a pipe that comes from that facility that often is spilling water just randomly at random times. And we don't know what's in that water. I think we have reported that to DEP or DEC. I'm not sure if we followed up with them, but
So that they've actually recruited us to turn that into a wetland again. And so that pipe should be fixed. And we have rerouted it into a wetland that we're restoring outside the building. But we just fixed it this fall. So if you haven't seen it yet, but it's coming from the parking lot is where it's coming from.
Huh. But that's really good to know. And I'm really glad that change was made.
Yeah, we treated the frag, and we're gonna put a bunch of, we're gonna really work in the spring to bring back a bunch of native plants, but hopefully the water is going back into the wetland now.
Yeah, that is music to my ears.
Yeah. And generally the regulated or the legal MS4 stormwater outfalls on this along the river are also well mapped. And anything that is a discharge point is supposed to have a speedies permit associated with it, but it also should have signage if that's the case. I 100% assume there's a bunch of things that are illegal, but the legal things certainly are mapped.
Yeah.
I remember we worked in Norwalk, like that was someone's project. If they walked or they went up the river and they just kind of like tried to identify all the different pipes and the ones that people had no idea where they were coming from.
We actually had a student, I think it was a Pratt student, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, do the same thing on the Bronx River. But I'm not sure if that was just in Westchester County or if it was for the full length of the river. Let's take a look. But it might be worth doing it again.
Yeah.
It just takes a lot of effort and dedication.
Yeah.
So we're coming up on the end of the meeting, and I want to plug the Eco Team co-chair position. So we are down one co-chair, Elliot Nagel, who was director of the Thane Family Forest and an Eco Team co-chair for 2 years. He just left his position to take up a new position at the Nature Conservancy. So we wish him well, and we're very thankful for his 2 years serving on the Eco Team. But we have a vacancy, and so if you know anyone who's interested in taking a leadership role in the Eco Team, we highly encourage you to reach out to them. Being a co-chair is not too scary. You don't need to be a scientist with lots of degrees. We would love to have a community member on the helping to set meeting agendas and put items on the agenda, come up with ideas for in-person events, helping to share resources and things like that. It's not a scary position, I don't think. but the more the merrier. And so if we could add another co-chair or two to this team, I think it would do good things for us. So please feel free to share this with others. I can get an email ready that we can pass around if that makes it easier. But we do definitely want to fill this vacancy as soon as we can. Becca, do you want to
And
say
I
anything
will
about it?
reiterate. No, I'll just say it's great. I will reiterate that it's not a scary position. It's, and I'll also reiterate that would love somebody who's not necessarily coming from a science background or who works in this field. I think a community member would be really great.
Yeah, love having different perspectives because there's so much that we can learn from each other. So,
And if you're not interested, please let people know the opportunity exists.
yeah, please help us do that outreach if you can. We really appreciate it. Typical co-chair term is about 2 years. We do elections every 2 years. In position now because so Becca has been on. I don't even know when you first became a co-chair. I know it's been quite a few years for you.
I don't know, I lost count, but COVID happened and things got weird. So I can't remember exactly.
Typically they were every 2 years. And the other teams that we have on the Bronx River Alliance, I think our elections are more frequent.
Yeah. And by things, I mean, not things with the eco team got weird, just like COVID made everything weird, just to clarify.
I knew what you meant. I didn't with that, I mean, we're a little over time, so I thank you for joining us this evening and giving your feedback and just giving us your attention. Maybe we don't have time right now for this open discussion, or maybe we do. I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes, but you can always send us an email with your thoughts and questions and ideas on how we can make the eco team the best resource it can be for this community. I want to plug 2 upcoming events. Our Bronx River Assembly is on February 6th at 11 a.m. This is a really great networking opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to learn more about the work that the Bronx River Alliance does, as well as meet our partners and the work that they're doing across the Bronx. And last year we had, I think, 100 and something people come out, and it was a really great event. Lots of business cards were exchanged and collaborations were formed, and events were created and partnerships were generated and all that good stuff. So we encourage you all to be there. It's open for everyone, and it's a great time. And then our next Eco Team meeting will be March 11th at 5:30 p.m. also on Zoom. That will probably be our first Eco Team meeting of the year. There's a chance that we have a specialized meeting specifically to talk about the watershed management plan as that becomes more available, and we can talk about that. So if it might be the case that we have an Eco Team meeting in late January or early February. If not, the next meeting will be March 11th. So we hope to see you there. And I look forward to seeing emails in my inbox with your bright ideas for what we can be doing to make the thing better.
Yeah, and just before we close out entirely, Lily, did you want to say anything about the survey?
Just very briefly, I put 2 links in here. I'm going to put them again in the chat. These are links to the Long Island Sound Study Environmental Justice Needs Assessment. If you are so inclined, please complete the survey. It's to help us figure out what to do with our funding and resources. So it would be great if you could share the links with, community members. Would really appreciate it. That's all. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lily. All righty, everyone. I want to thank you again for joining us this evening. I hope you all learned something interesting, and I hope to see you all either in a virtual space or along the Bronx River sometime soon.
Thank you all for the work you're doing. You're fabulous.
Thanks for your support, Marty. Always appreciate it.